Hello and most welcome to age 1851. It's just amazing how many episodes there are now. 1851. Beyond belief. We will today continue with Rule Following Revisited by Warren Goldfarb. And we will continue where we left off last time. Last time was rather complex, to say the least. We were talking about the entire background, something that Wittgenstein called shared human behavior, gemeinsame menschliche Handlungsweise. And that is a system of reference. All what is around us. One could see also another way of approaching this. I tried when I was thinking the other day. All of the background, all how we deal with each other. One way of challenging this is actually to take up the Cartesian coordinate system and see that we ordinarily see human beings, or in particular ourselves, as a sort of dot in the XYZ system, like a sort of point of origin in an already constructed, completed world. So we sort of walk around in that system, although we do not participate, and we have no relations to the things around us in this XYZ system. We are cut off from the reality, hanging in the air, so to speak. This is not what Wittgenstein means. What he means is that we are in the weave. We are not dots, an ego or an I floating in the XYZ. Our I is deeply involved with every other living being and relation on the planet. The separatedness of classical physics is an illusion. A persistent one, but still it's an illusion. That we sort of originate from this dot, and into this dot comes perception of the surrounding world, which is outside, strictly outside. Not where we are, but outside of us. Wittgenstein is closer to the Kleinbottle logic. there is penetration. Inside meets the outside. And this is constantly going on. And also the Geschichte, what has happened, is interacting with the now, with the future. How we pose our future is changing the past. So it's not only X, Y, Z that is questioned by Wittgenstein, so to speak. It is also the T-line, the timeline. The very idea that we are cut off from the past. And that the past is a sort of big bang that determines everything. And that it does that in a manner that cannot be changed. And is not dependent on relations. So also time hangs free in the interlocutor model or the classical model. Instead, we are offered die gemeinsame menschliche Handlungsweise in the world, engaging in the world. My colleague Kalle mentioned here from the biography of Ray Monk that Wittgenstein worked as an assistant apothecary at the pharmacy. So he was constantly in the world, engaged in the things. Not disjunct in Cambridge, instead taking meager works to show that he's participating, or actually is participating. So we can continue. It's the second paragraph on page 87, where we left off. The point surfaces again in paragraph 208. In which he talks about teaching someone a notion of regularity.
Regularity.
I influenced him by expressions of agreement, rejection, expectation, encouragement. I let him go his way or hold him back, and so on. Here again, we see the reliance on shared responses. And then he turns and asks in paragraph 209. Isn't there a deeper explanation
Deeper, deeper.
Or at least, mustn't the understanding of the explanation be deeper?
Deeper and deeper.
Of course, his answer is negative. He wants to cut off the idea that somehow the explanation we give is sufficient for practical purposes. But that there must be something deeper that is not captured by any one explanation that I give. Since those consist of just more sayings. Our understanding of what it is to go on in the same way is fully given by the explanations that we can give. But those explanations are entered for particular purposes against a background of practices.
Practices.
To reiterate, the person for whom the paradox of 201 arises is one who thinks that the standard of correctness must pick out something in the realm of things that might possibly be meant. Where possibly here means not possible in human practice, but something else. What I do when I actually explain works quite well according to the interlocutor. But he holds also that there must be something of a different order that makes plain what all of the excluded possibilities are. When we see that nothing does this, the interlocutor concludes that we have a paradox.
Paradox.
The lesson of the paradox should be then that there is a problem with this demand.
Problem.
What leads to this dismissal of reliance on human responses? In trying to get us to give up the demand for the grounding of how the correct continuation is picked out from all the possibilities. Wittgenstein wants to block the idea that the appeal to practices is superficial, that something in our practices points to something deeper or relies on something in back of them. This is one part of the agenda of paragraphs 203 to 242. A typical example is paragraph 210. Every explanation which I can give myself, I give to him too. The final observation in Wittgenstein's treatment of rule following comes in paragraph 242. It is not only in agreement with definitions, but also, odd as it may sound, agreement in judgments that is required for communication by means of language. Wittgenstein's rhetoric here can look shocking as he registers his point would be shocking if we were maintaining a sharp line between definitions and judgments.
Sharp, sharp, shocking.
In fact, paragraph 242 is precisely trying to undermine such a sharp distinction between what is said within a framework, judgments, and what is said outside it and is constitutive of it. Definitions. For if one took there to be such a distinction, then one could certainly challenge the coherence of what Wittgenstein says. How could it be a judgment if we agree that communication requires or presupposes it? If communication required it, it would be impossible to deny, so it expresses no matter of fact. Can go up a bit on the page. That is, if Wittgenstein maintained a sharp distinction between what is given by the framework of a language and what we can say given that framework. Then one could use one of the fundamental ideas behind the Tractatus Logico-Philosophicus to charge that paragraph 242 cannot be right. If language depends on something, then that something cannot be in language, and hence cannot be a judgment. The obviousness of this objection is acknowledged when Wittgenstein says that what he is saying is odd. However, the objection relies on taking the to be fixed content of our words in a strong sense. We first fix how language has content, and then we make claims in the language. That is a picture that Wittgenstein is deeply against in his later philosophy. He's not using words like judgment from within, such a view of language. The judgment he is talking about can, in certain circumstances, be real judgments. They are challengeable, open to debate, open to justification, learnable, and so forth. But the circumstances are all important. On other occasions, these things will not be at issue. Indeed, on other occasions, they cannot be at issue. Then we might be said to agree in those judgments. Wittgenstein's remarks on rules of measurement at the end of paragraph 242 illustrate the point.
Point.
It is one thing to describe methods of measurement and another to obtain and state results of measurement. But what we call measuring is partly determined by a certain constancy in the results of measurement. Do not take the local distinction between the methods of measurement and the results of measurement in a particular case, or even a range of particular cases, as being expandable into a wholesale conception of rules of representation versus things represented. Which would imply that it is only within the rules of representation that we can have any notion of fact. Maybe the footnote that could be of interest. Yeah, I'll get into that. The Hacke-Schulte translation cited here says that agreement in judgment is required. Anscombe is even more insistent. If language is to be a means of communication, there must be agreement not only in definitions, but also in judgments. The must in her rendering makes it sound almost as if Wittgenstein is presenting some kind of transcendental argument. But I find no requirement and no necessity in the text. I would translate it roughly to communication and understanding by means of language. There belongs agreement not only in definitions, but also in judgments. With no must, it is an observation that might at least arguably fall under what Wittgenstein calls description. What sort of agreements are these agreements in judgment that belongs to language? This is a rather slippery question, since these are not agreements in any ordinary sense. Which is indicated by the last sentence of paragraph 241. That is not agreement in opinions, but in form of life.
Life. Life.
Perhaps, whether a rule has been obeyed at a certain step, what counts as the same again, as in when two things are instances of the same rule, when one needs justification for saying that a rule has been obeyed. When justification is no longer at issue, how an example is to be taken. These agreements do not underlie rule following. They are embedded in it. and perhaps it in them. The word accord and the word rule are related to one another. They are cousins. That one.
Cousins.
Yeah, cousins or siblings. If I teach anyone the use of the one word, he learns the use of the other with it. Wittgenstein says in paragraph 242 that this seems to abolish logic. Why does it seem to do so? No doubt because one hangs onto a view of logic that comes from Wittgenstein's past. On this view, logic is a byproduct of the representational structure of our language. Now, if you say there is no such thing as a representational structure, that nothing belongs to language qua language. What fixes, which fixes what is sayable within language? And then the question arises, how do we have logic? How do we have any distinction between rationality and merely what we do? Indeed. If one reads the sections between paragraph 203 and 242 from a certain angle, it can look as if Wittgenstein is saying that the only logical compulsion boils down to merely in our doing things in a certain way. That is just a matter of our believing or holding something strongly. Remarks like, when I obey a rule, I do not choose. I obey the rule blindly, have been taken to suggest that that is all there is to it. That is the wrong lesson to take.
Wrong.
The correct one is that there is no global rounding of logical compulsion.
Global.
If we want to draw a distinction between rationality and inclinations, it lies only in the individual cases. We must look at what we actually do in making distinctions in particular circumstances between rationality and inclinations. That is all that there is to it. Anything else is a philosophical chimera.
Chimera.
And that ends my reading of Warren Goldfarb, Rule Following Revisited.
Right.
I would just go and take. Well, let's go for some quotes here. Let's see what we can find. We can go to the second paragraph of 87. And this is so important. It's the first time I read this expressively. Something to be remembered. The second paragraph color is that, I think that's the third, if I'm calculating correctly. Yeah, that's the one. Let's see here. It's towards the end of it. Six lines down there. He wants to cut off the idea. He wants to cut off the idea that the explanation we give is sufficient for practical purposes. But that there must be something deeper that is not captured by any one explanation that I give, since those consist of just more sayings. It's a difficult sentence in itself, but this sort of cuts off the idea of a deeper explanation that is explicit, sayable, if you like. So there would be just more sayings if you take the view of the interlocutor. So reality, and here it comes to agreement perfectly with quantum relativity. It cannot be captured, and our inability to capture is not a handicap. It's actually something fantastic. I would say that is the going out of the fly bottle of the fly. Once you realize your, so to speak, individual possibilities of explaining things is not all there is. Not at all. And once you think about it, it is absolutely obvious. Of course, my knowledge, Hans Johansson, can only be a fraction. And what I explain, even less so. This opens up to understanding that knowledge is something bigger than ourselves. And that knowledge can be equal to the great unifying principle or unifying mass of knowing, the deeper understanding. I'd say God. The enormity is possible to liken to God. And a universal will, if you like. I'm not trying to convince you about God or anything. I'm just giving you examples so you can see what that great thing can be. But a good start, definitely a good start, is that I can't know much. Me as that little point in the coordinate system, even less so. But if you are willing to give up the impossible anyway outside perspective, the Thomas Nagel perspective, a point from nowhere, or at least soften that fixation, you will be able to enter a heap more knowledge. And there are explanations. This is why I like Goldfarb / Wittgenstein. We do have explanations, but they are in specific circumstances. It is when to understand when an explanation is valid or called for, and when it's not. Further down on paragraph, see if I get the number right, 4, I think it is. Third line on that one, if you might, Kellen. Wittgenstein wants to block the idea that the appeal to practices is superficial. That something in our practices points to something deeper or relies on something in back of them. So this is the very urge to explain everything. The cosmological fallacy by Roberto Unger and Lee Smolin all lead to that diminishment of understanding, making the world so much smaller. And I'd say, even go to say non-functionable. We go to the next page, if you may. And here is a reference to his point would be shocking. It's the second sentence in the second paragraph. His point would be shocking if he were maintaining a sharp line between definitions and judgments. And we went into these sharp definitions before. The problematic, in a nutshell, is the sharpness. Soften it up, making it a bit murky or fractal, if you like. They will be working much better. Much more to your satisfaction. And I think I read rhetorics now, there is the mode of view of Frege the interlocutor. They want to keep a sharp line, unsuccessfully, I would say, between definition and judgments. They only work, both of them only work if they can be murky, fractal, liminal. We can go to the next paragraph, beginning with the word obviousness. And at the end there, we have like 4 or 5 lines from the end. The judgments that he's talking about can, that's the important word here, can in a certain circumstance be real judgments. They are challengeable, open to debate, open to justification, learnable, and so forth. But listen now, the circumstances are all important. And there you can see in the next sentence, on other occasions, these things will not be at issue. Indeed, on other occasions, they cannot be at issue. Then we might be said to agree in those judgments. So sometimes there is an agreement and sometimes there is not. It's dependent on the circumstances. And we can go down to the footnote. It was a gem there. And Goldfarb makes a very important note from the Hacker-Schulte translation. It shouldn't be must. So the last sentence, with no must, it is an observation that might, at least arguably, fall under what Wittgenstein calls description in paragraph 109. So here you see the murky line and how it is utterly, in the end, dependent on circumstance. So you can also understand that by realizing that time is also part of quantum reality. And we tend to make everything what Wittgenstein calls global, used in another sense than we use the word in global reality. But think of global as Wittgenstein mentioned it as universal, coinage, doing it mechanically, not considering the situation, being too coarse, gross, chopping everything off, and leave yourself without the interwovenness, which is such a sharp feature of reality. We can go to the next page of this incredible article. What sort of, I start directly, what sort of agreements are these agreements in judgments that belong to language? This is a rather slippery question, since these are not agreements in any ordinary sense. And in the parenthesis, it is not agreement in opinions, but in form of life. So it's not explicit. It cannot be explained because it's a sort of doing. Understanding is not something explainable. Otherwise, we end up in the well-famed paradox. No, the understanding is the beyondness, which goes much further, longer, broader, wider, the last sentence on that paragraph. If I teach anyone the use of the one word, and listen now, he learns the use of the other with it. They come together, the words. They are not separable. It is not the ostensive definition of Augustinian. No, there is no separatedness in language. They come together. It is not like, first I learned chair, somebody pointed it out to me, and then the next day I learned table, seat, the legs of the chair, what the floor is, what the kitchen is, all by themselves. No, not a chance. This is not how it works. They are already interwoven. Learning one word, you partly learn the other one as well. Explanations can be there, but that they are not global. They're not underlying the whole thing. They are circumstantial. And here is an exclamation from Goldfarb. So what Wittgenstein is saying in 242, and that's the next paragraph, it seems to abolish logic, and Goldfarb falls out, what a terrible thing that would be. And it does seem to do that, and how many have not interpreted that way? But it is, as he explains, it's a byproduct of our idea of a representational structure of language. That meaning that we think it's universal and underlying language, calling the shots, so to speak. And by undermining that view, the view of the former, earlier Wittgenstein, people think, for obvious reasons, there can be no logic at all. Entrat postmodernism. No, that is not the case. Logic can be as healthy as ever. We can have rationality as long as we understand that that is not enough. Logic is by itself a working procedure. It's a just brilliant point here, and I think it helps to understand the whole idea of Wittgenstein. As I just read, logic is still possible, but we need to block the idea that logic underlies all of language, that there is a cause and effect starts somewhere, or that logic is foundational at the very bottom of language. Once we understand that, we do also understand abolishing that idea, doesn't mean that logic, rationality, thinking, or any of those things disappear. That is the most pertinent thing to remember, and the point here by Goldfarb that is so important to remember. I let my poor colleague here who has problems with his laptop come in here for commentary. Welcome, Kalle Lundahl.
Thank you, thank you.
Do remember to speak directly into the microphone, please.
Yes. So here I want to comment on paragraph 242, which it begins here on page 87, the last phrase. And then Goldfarb has this lengthy footnote.
Could you please speak a little bit louder?
Yes, and so this is about paragraph 242. Goldfarb has this lengthy footnote, and where he discusses translation, and if I might criticize, I would have preferred also the German text here. Because
I thought the same, yeah.
It's not very professional to not to include the German text. But anyhow, let me. This is another part of paragraph 242. Is the last paragraph on this. It doesn't start. Anyhow, now it starts again on my computer. I have problems with the cable. So here, I found this phrase most interesting. It is one thing to describe methods of measurement, another to obtain and state results of measurement. But what we call measuring is partly determined by certain constancy in results of measurement. Goldfarb comments, do not take the local distinction between the methods of measurement and the results of measurement in a particular case, or even a range of particular cases as being expandable, the wholesale conception of rules of representation versus things represented, and so forth.
Very good. Yeah, thank you for that one. Do continue.
Why I'm taking this up? Well, in quantum physics, the measuring problem is one of the greatest problems ever in the past century, and still is. Physicists don't really understand the measuring problem. And here, Wittgenstein has given his take on it, so to say. So to say, of course. But what does Wittgenstein really mean? So let me paraphrase. I might paraphrase wrongly, but so it's one thing to describe methods of measurement. So you could say, you can use, let's say you want to take the ruler. You have something, it indicates 1 meter, but we know that 1 meter is a relative concept. 1 meter in Paris is another meter perhaps here, or the meter itself is a man-made, is arbitrary thing. It's nothing that is in the nature. In Paris in the 18th century, during the French Revolution, they took the meter and said this is a meter. And so you could here describe methods of measurement. Okay, you can use the ruler of 1 meter, for instance, and another to obtain a set results of measurement. So you can describe methods of measurement. Okay, you could say I use the ruler of 1 meter as my measuring device. And however, it's another thing to actually go and measure something. Say my height, which is about 177 or 178. And how in the measuring process, I'm actually myself, I become one with the measuring device in quantum physics.
Yeah.
As Terry Marx Tallow points out, you cannot, so to say, separate the measuring device, the ruler, from the person who does the measuring. Or it could be a third person or another person who actually measures me. But then that person who measures me is also implied in the measuring. But I don't know if this is what Wittgenstein is saying, or what is his point, do you think?
Well, his point is there at the end as being expandable into a wholesale conception of rules of representation versus things represented. So it's the expandability that he's disagreeing with. But on a small scale, in a particular circumstance, as you mentioned, the meter, or when you measure and get a particle in quantum mechanics, that's okay. But don't make it into a wholesale conception and say, like Democritus and Newton, everything is just particles. We have waves also.
Indeed. When somebody has measured me, then the superposition actually collapses in that very moment.
Indeed.
The wave collapses. Because before somebody measures me, I'm in a relative state of height, so to say. Would it work, this analogy, or?
Yeah, to some extent, yeah. Don't make the meter into a wholesale conception. Don't think the meter as universal, but to measure you in a specific circumstance, in a specific place, it works fine. Yeah, it collapses in the specific circumstance.
Yes, and so why would the, so to say, the measuring device, the meter, be something scientific, so to say? Is in itself, it's scientific only together with the person who measures. So there is no measuring device which is separate from everything else.
No, yeah, very good, yeah. There is no separation, exactly. The meter is not separated from what it measures. Very good, Kalle, yeah.
Or who does the measurement, so is...
Yeah. There is no meter out there, so to speak. The meter is measuring, and it means, meter means measure. That's the Latin.
So the last phrase here in Wittgenstein, what we call measuring is partly determined by certain constancies in measurement. So you could say that I could measure myself, say, no, so let's say somebody measures me, this person says, you are 177, then I measure myself, no, I'm actually 178. So there is no constancy. Perhaps I want to exaggerate a little bit my height, or is it now a question of millimeters? Is it 177 or 178? I prefer 178, but perhaps somebody would disagree.
Yeah, there you have it. There you have it, Kalle. Goldfarb is, just let me mention it, Goldfarb is very specific here. Measuring does work, but you need to remember, bring in the special circumstances. Don't make it a global thing. That is when it collapses. That is when it becomes nonsensical.
And we have also, Hans, focused on Alexander technique. And as you have pointed out, Hans, when you do Alexander, before Alexander exercise, you can be actually less tall, thanks to So you expand actually during exercise. If
Yeah,
do
you
it
get
correctly.
longer. Couple of centimeters usually.
Of course, there is certain constancy in height in all of us, but it's never scientific per se, or what would you call it? It's about constancy. So it's an average. We could say it's an average, perhaps. Average height is like that, depending on a certain circumstance.
Yeah.
So I don't know to which degree, or would this Wittgenstein disagree with the measuring problem in quantum physics? That there is no.
He's very close to quantum mechanics, according to me anyway, in my humble point of view. And that is because every experiment within quantum mechanics is a new experiment. It's a new circumstance. They're not generalizable, as they usually, the term is. Whereas in Newtonian classical physics, everything is over expandable, over generalized. So it covers the whole universe from the Big Bang to the Big Crunch.
Absolutely, and to emphasize this point, classical physics, there is no, it's always constant. Measurements are always constant, always the same.
Yeah, it doesn't make any leeway for differences or flexibility. No, yeah, exactly. It doesn't exist, Kalle.
So the word certain is important here. Certain in the sense.
Exactly, yeah.
We could retranslate certain as somewhat consistent. Somewhat consistent when you measure things. That's what he say. So there is no, what do you say, classical physics of absolute constancy in everything that he wants to.
No, it doesn't become, the measuring doesn't become global. The meter is not on Alpha Centauri or within the black hole. And the atoms are not the only things. They're also wave. And they do not go into the same global take. They are contrary to each other.
For the sake of curiosity, I want to see how often Wittgenstein mentions measure in his philosophy investigations. 22 times. Let me see. So it's important. I could go to the paragraph 242. It's here. I could read the whole paragraph with a little bit of exaggeration, perhaps, to avoid the dryness of this argument, because this is actually fun. It is not only agreement in definitions, but also, odd as it might sound, agreement in judgments that is required for communication by means of language. This seems to abolish logic, but does not so. It is one thing to describe methods of measurement, another to obtain a state results of measurement. But what we call measuring is in part determined by certain consistency in results of measurement.
Yeah, very good, yeah. Thanks. That's the important thing.
So how does he begin the paragraph 242?
I think that's a good part to end, because it's been dragging out a bit here.
Yes, let's end here.
Say thank you very much, Kalle Lundahl. Sorry about your mishap with the laptop. I hope it settles. Thank you everyone for listening in and watching. Have a very pleasant morning, day, afternoon, or evening, wherever you are. Bye-bye for now.